The best place to start talking about the Security Plus examination and the whole world of security is right here at risk assessment. So you start off with the network. You have a domain server that's running, say, Microsoft's Active Directory to manage all of your client machines and resources. And then you start to add client machines to your network. And then you wire everybody up into a switch and you establish your network. Then, of course, you have a web server out there that connects to the outside world that serves up your web pages. You may even use that for some remote access. And then you have, of course, a database server so that everyone can get to the SQL database and read data from it. Or you may have an Oracle database out there or even an open source MySQL database. The bottom line is you already have a lot of resources right here. Now we throw in the internet, the ability for people outside to connect through the internet into your organization, either to surf your web server or to connect to access internal resources. And you stop to think, now, what risks do I have here? Do I really have any risks? And this is where the idea of security can become a daunting task for you, because let's take a look at some of the risks we have. Well, let's start off with our servers. What's going to happen if we lose our database server, if we lose our web server, if we lose our domain server? So we're going to have to assess what's the risk of that happening, and what is it going to cost us, and what is it going to take us to get that back into service. And then, of course, we have our network devices, in this case, the switch. And we will most likely have other network devices. And how are we going to handle failures with those things? And then, of course, we have all of our client machines. And some of these are going to be more essential to the business than others, maybe, depending on what's being done on those machines. And then, of course, we have our network itself, the physical network. And we have to protect that from hackers. We have to protect it from damage within the building. How are we going to deal with those risks? Then we have our connection to the outside world, our internet connection. Then, of course, there's the internet itself and the risk that can come from that. And then, of course, we have those outside remote machines that are connecting either to our website or remotely they're coming into our network. If all those risks are not overwhelming enough for you, what about our users on the inside? Users can accidentally do things. They can become disgruntled employees and purposefully cause problems in the network and to our data. Visitors that come in that need access to the network can unwittingly cause problems or expose data or wander into areas of the network they shouldn't go. And then, of course, vendors that we have to have come in and work with us, maybe programmers we've hired from outside or other administrators or whatever. Then we have our administrators. Now, our administrators, oddly enough, are one of our biggest risks because they're in there with administrative permissions working all over the network. They can make mistakes. They can become disgruntled. There's all kinds of things that can happen, and they can just make a mistake due to lack of training or understanding. Then, of course, there are those hackers out there. You can see when you start to think about the Security Plus world, there's a lot of things that you have to consider here, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about. The first step in this whole thing is risk assessment, and this is the process of identifying the threats that we have to our network, the vulnerabilities of our networks and our systems, and the impact of a loss of data or the ability to process the data. How is that going to affect us? What are we going to do about it? Risk assessment is also referred to as risk analysis or risk calculation. You may see either one of those terms. Now, here's the bottom line. Our identified risks need to be prioritized. We're going to have to go through and identify all of our risks and then prioritize them based on the cost or the threat to our organization, to our business, to our livelihood. And we're going to prioritize them based on a couple of things. Number one, the cost and the threat, and number two, the likelihood of occurrence. Now, some risks are going to justify considerable expense to avoid or to mitigate those risks. And we may spend $15,000, $20,000 to have another server kind of in a warm standby in case we lose that all-important database server. We'll have to justify those based on the kind of problem it's going to cause us. Now, other risks represent minimal impact, and dealing with the incident may be the most economical and logical approach, and we really don't do a whole lot to actually prevent that. But you're going to have to go through, make these assessments, and decide what you're going to prepare for and how you're going to prepare for it. And based on the likelihood of the occurrence, is this going to be a relatively small problem that's going to happen 20 times over the course of a year that basically equates to a big expensive problem when you add it all up? Or is this a major threat to the existence of our company that we're going to have to make sure that we mitigate this? And so that's the whole risk assessment process. Now, when we're doing risk assessment, understand there's two ways of measuring our risks and our assessments of those risks. There's quantitative assessments, and with a quantitative assessment, this is an assessment that we can easily convert into monetary measurements based on factual data. We know if our web server's down, we know how many hundreds of dollars it costs per hour. If our domain server goes down, and we can't log in people from the outside world, we know what it's going to cost us because they're still billing us, those sorts of things. A qualitative assessment is something that's opinion-based or subjective. We don't have hard numbers on it, but we know it's going to be a problem and we know it's going to cost us something. Now, usually a qualitative type assessment is going to involve a risk that represents really inconvenience or the loss of a functionality that does not directly impact the primary business operations at this particular point in time. We'll come back and talk about that a little bit later on. So this is kind of the bottom line on risk assessments. And let's start to move through the course and look at how we're going to deal with risks in planning for them and then in actually going after mitigating them or doing away with those risks.